It's early Wednesday morning, December 20th, 2006. Denver is already buzzing, exactly 5 days before Christmas, and the city is moving. Radio alarms are going off in 1,000 homes along the Front Range. Coffee makers are hissing. Kids are being shaken awake for school. People are thinking about their holiday lists, their flights out, the relatives waiting for them in other states. The forecast the night before said snow, but Denver people have heard that before. Snow doesn't stop Denver. Snow is normal. Snow is expected. But this wasn't going to be normal snow. This is the story of the Denver holiday blizzard of 2006, a storm so sudden and so violent that it transformed 5 days before Christmas into something people still talk about almost 2 decades later, a moment when an entire city, an entire region was simply shut down. If you love stories about how nature humbles us, how communities come together in the face of disaster, and how ordinary people become heroes, please subscribe and help us reach 50,000 subscribers. Let's go. Sarah checked the weather one more time before heading to the office. The morning was grey but not dark. Not yet. Her kids were getting dropped at school by 8 a.m. Everything normal. Everything routine. At the airport, United Airlines and Frontier were running full schedules. The holiday crush had begun. Families were coming in and out. It was the busiest travel week of the year. Denver International Airport, the fifth busiest in the nation, was humming. Downtown, shops were packed with last-minute shoppers. Malls had their holiday music playing. Parking lots were filling up. People had a sense that this would be their last real shopping day before the 25th. The radio stations kept running the blizzard watch, but Denver didn't panic about blizzards. The city sits at mile-high elevation, at the edge of the Rockies. Winter storms are part of living there. You plan for them, you respect them, but you don't think they'll derail your entire life. Not 5 days before Christmas. Tom, a postal worker, started his route like any other. The US mail had to move. Christmas cards were coming in by the hundreds. Packages had to be delivered. The system had never failed Denver before, not in any serious way. The infrastructure was solid. There were plows, there were backup plans, there was always a backup plan. By mid-morning, though, people began to notice something was different about how the snow was coming down. The first squalls came in around mid-morning. Not isolated flakes. Not a gentle accumulation. The snow came in walls, horizontal, driven. The wind was already picking up, gusts that would reach 40 miles per hour and beyond. Visibility started dropping within 30 minutes. What had been a grey morning became a whiteout. By 10 South a.m., the Colorado Department of Transportation made its first closure, then another. Interstate 25, the main north-south corridor through the state, started getting shut down in sections, then more sections. By noon, I-25 was closed from Denver all the way south to the New Mexico border and north into Wyoming. I-76, I-70, US 36, US 85, all of it was going dark. The schools sent out the first dismissal alerts around 11 a.m. Send the kids home early, get them off the roads. But those roads were already becoming a nightmare. Sarah tried to leave her office by 11:30. She made it maybe 3 miles before traffic stopped completely. The streets around downtown Denver had become parking lots. Hundreds of cars were at a standstill. The snow kept falling. The wind kept pushing drifts in front of cars that couldn't move. She could barely see the car in front of her, maybe a few feet away. The radio was full of reports, cars sliding into each other, jackknifed semi-trucks, National Guard units being activated. She sat in her car, engine running, heat on, and waited. By 1 p.m., the Denver Regional Transportation District, the RTD, the city's bus and light rail system, made an unprecedented announcement. For the first time since a massive blizzard in 2003, they were suspending service. All buses, all light rail, shut it down. There was no point. The streets were impassable. The drivers couldn't see. The system, the infrastructure that moves 3 million people in the metro area, had simply stopped. Joanna Snyder, a teacher from Wyoming, had a flight out of Denver International Airport at 3 p.m. She'd been checking in when the storm started intensifying. She was standing near the gate, carrying her carry-on, waiting to board. Then the announcement came. All flights had been cancelled. She watched it happen, the gate agents closing down the podium, the electronic board filling with red text. Cancelled, cancelled, cancelled. Within hours, over 2,000 flights would be cancelled. Stranded passengers began filling the terminals. Some were making phone calls, trying to rebook. Others were just sitting, staring at the boards, processing that they weren't going home for Christmas. By 2 p.m., the airport announced its full closure. 6 runways, none of them open, no landings, no takeoffs. The plows were out there, working frantically, but the snow was coming so fast and the winds were whipping drifts up to 5 feet high under the aircraft wings. The machines couldn't keep up. Mother Nature had simply overwhelmed them. Tom, the postal worker, abandoned his route around 1:30 p.m. The post office issued the order: get back to the facility, get off the streets. By that evening, the U.S. Postal Service had shut down every location from Denver east to the Kansas border. The mail stopped. In America, that almost never happens. By nightfall, the situation had become surreal. The visibility was nearly zero. The wind sounded like it was tearing the sky apart. It was December 20th, but it felt like the middle of January, that brutal, deep cold part of winter when the whole world is white and quiet and completely hostile to human life. Sarah had spent the last 8 hours in her car. She'd turned on the emergency lights, and she sat there watching the snowdrift pile higher and higher against the windshield. Other cars were around her, shapes barely visible in the swirling white. Some people got out and walked, others stayed. Some tried to walk back to somewhere warm, some tried to keep walking forward. At the airport, the situation was becoming desperate. Nearly 5,000 people were stranded. The terminals had become a makeshift shelter. Cardboard boxes with blankets were cobbled together into ad hoc rest areas. Joanna Snyder found a spot near a United Airlines window where other stranded people were camped out. She had left her home thinking she'd be in Virginia by nightfall. Now she didn't know when she'd leave Denver, maybe tomorrow, maybe the day after that. The airline said it could be days. On the eastern plains, farmers and ranchers were watching cattle clustered in drifts that were already past 6 feet. Some animals were already lying down, conserving energy. The temperature had dropped into the single digits. The wind chill was devastating. Without intervention, without feed, without shelter, thousands of animals were going to die. Tom found shelter in a friend's apartment after abandoning his mail truck. He made coffee and watched the weather reports. The meteorologist was shaking his head. "We can't overcome Mother Nature," the Postal Service spokesman would say the next morning. But Tom already knew that. The night was the longest part. The darkness, the silence beneath the wind, the waiting. In homes across Denver, in cars, in the airport terminals, people sat and waited and wondered when this would end. By Thursday morning, the snow had finally stopped. The wind had lessened. The sky was still grey, but it was no longer falling apart. The rescues began immediately. Police and National Guard units moved through the city with Humvees and snowcats, tracked vehicles that could cut through drifts like knives through snow. They pulled people from stalled cars, drove neighbors to critical medical appointments, made sure the vulnerable, the elderly, the sick, got to safety. Sarah was rescued from her car around 8 a.m. Thursday. A National Guard unit saw her emergency lights blinking and dug her out. Her hands were shaking. She hadn't slept, but she was alive. She was safe. They drove her to a warming center set up by the city. At the airport, Joanna Snyder and hundreds of others were still waiting. The terminal had activated what they called the Stranded Passenger Plan. Workers handed out blankets, pulled from boxes near the ticket counters. Some travelers who'd been stuck since Wednesday afternoon had now been at the airport for over 18 hours. Joanna finally bought a Denver souvenir t-shirt and sweatpants. She was tired of sitting in the same clothes, but she was still waiting. The community response came quickly. Churches opened their doors as warming centers. Bars served hot coffee and food to anyone who could get there. Farmhouses took in stranded travelers. People on residential streets that were still impassable helped neighbors dig out cars, pushed vehicles stuck in drifts, offered shelter and hot meals. Around the state, the Colorado National Guard and units from Wyoming and Oklahoma began an unprecedented operation. Helicopters, UH-60 Blackhawks, were being loaded with hay and feed to be dropped to ranches where cattle were stranded in 10-foot drifts. C-130 transport planes were being deployed. By the end of it, National Guard units would drop feed to an estimated 345,000 cattle stranded across Colorado. It was the kind of logistical effort usually reserved for foreign disasters. But this was home. This was immediate. This was necessary. They remember the National Guard trucks rolling through their neighborhoods. They remember the sound of helicopters. They remember opening their doors to people who had been strangers 12 hours earlier. They remember the gratitude in people's eyes, the simple fact of being warm, being safe, being helped by a stranger in the snow. Tom returned to the post office on Friday morning. The facility was still buried, but the team was organizing. The backlog of mail was enormous, weeks of work ahead. But people were talking to each other, making jokes, trying to process what had happened. By that evening, the post office would begin making limited deliveries. It would take until March 26th, more than 3 months, for Denver's streets to be fully clear of snow and ice. The numbers were staggering when people finally sat down to calculate them. The blizzard had dropped over 20 inches of snow in Denver proper. Some mountain areas received more than 3 feet. The city recorded the second longest period of consecutive days of snow cover in its history, from December 21st through February 19th. The cost for snow removal in December alone was $2.8 million. By March 2007, it had climbed to over $13 million. United Airlines lost over $40 million. Over 2,000 flights had been cancelled. Thousands of travelers were rerouted, bumped, or stranded across the country. The ripple effect went from Denver to Los Angeles to New York. The all-weather airport had been humbled. But the real change wasn't in the numbers. It was in how people understood their own preparedness. Grocery store shelves stayed bare for weeks after the storm. People had learned to stock up, to prepare for the possibility that the system might stop. The Weather Service began revising its forecast protocols. Denver International Airport's entire snow removal program was overhauled. Equipment was expanded, staffing was increased, protocols were rewritten. It wasn't just a blizzard, it was a reminder that infrastructure is fragile, that we live on land that doesn't care about our schedules or our holiday plans, that systems can fail. And when they do, we depend on each other. On neighbors, on strangers, on the National Guard, on the mail carrier, on the person working at the warming center. People who lived through it still talk about where they were. Sarah talks about how, sitting in that car, she finally understood how quickly normal life could become extraordinary. Tom talks about the weeks of overtime, the backlog, and the way his entire team came together. Joanna Snyder eventually made it to Virginia. She made her flight on the following Tuesday. The first thing she did was call her family and tell them she loved them. She didn't take travel for granted after that. The snow from that blizzard didn't fully melt until spring. For 3 months, Denver was covered in white. For 3 months, people were reminded, and that reminder became part of the city's story. Did you experience the 2006 holiday blizzard? Do you remember where you were? Tell us in the comments below. We want to hear your stories. This kind of event belongs to the people who lived through it. If you love stories about history, about disasters, about how communities respond when everything stops, please like this video and subscribe.